All right, and welcome to the Planet X podcast. I'm Chris,
Mike.
and with us today we have from On the Square Comics, Jay Taylor.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Hey,
Good,
Jay,
man.
what's up, brother?
How are you guys?
And
Good.
we're going to talk a little bit about what Jay does. We talk about a little bit about what we're all into, and just kind of have a good old time tonight. So
We're
what do you
not
got?
going to do our weekly bereavement for British music icons.
Well, I guess we probably should do a quick
we
brief.
don't know. I just we did a whole show or a whole half a show about Lemmy, and I'm like, and now fucking David Bowie died.
Fucking David Bowie died, and then there was
finding out like an elf died.
Yeah, well, the Goblin King.
Yeah, it was like, that's what it was. It was like Aragorn. It was like or somebody from Lord of the Rings, like somebody who's not really a person. Like David Bowie, he's just like this thing that you always heard about, and it's like, well, no, he can't die because it wasn't really real. It was like Santa Claus died. Santa Claus didn't die. He's not a. It's just David Bowie. He just gives us things, and he shows up every once in a while, and he looks real cool. And...
Well, the greatest thing was as soon as you saw that he had passed away last night, immediately on Facebook you got everybody with their selected best lyric ever to anticipate dying.
Yeah.
Like, the stars look very different today, or R.I.P. David Bowie. You know, like everyone's trying to one-up themselves on picking the best death lyric.
Like,
Yeah.
it really is.
That's what I'm like. I was a bigger fan of the people that were just like putting up Bowie songs that they like.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the way you kind of celebrate it, and like, here's a great song, here's a great song. And in case you didn't think you liked David Bowie, here's Nirvana doing, a Bowie song, or here's
Sold the World.
yeah.
But the people who are trying to be a little too just on the nose with, hey, can I pick the perfect lyric from his song?
Right.
And then he releases a video that basically trumps them all.
Yeah.
Because he's basically talking about how he's dying anyway.
Yeah.
So
And then a lot of these people that are like picking these David Bowie songs and putting these David Bowie lyrics up don't even own a David Bowie album.
They know two songs.
They know the classic.
Suffragette
They know
City.
Let's Dance and China Girl, you know?
Yeah.
Well, those are two bad ones.
They are.
Maybe Rebel. It's,
Rebel. Yeah. Oh man, he was amazingly talented.
Talented. There's nothing, and with music, and I love music, and talking to different people about music, and you have people that have different opinions on bands, and people can be like, oh, I never liked the Beatles or the Rolling Stones that much. Nobody ever really said anything bad about David Bowie.
No.
Because he never fell in a rut, and he did so much different that there was something Bowie that everybody liked somewhere along the lines.
Something for everybody.
You know, when you look at some of the people talking about it, and Marilyn Manson and Lady Gaga and all these all across the board, you're like, oh yeah, Bowie changed my life. And you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And the one celebrity thing that really kind of that got to me a little bit, and it's one of those like lesser known facts. Slash from Guns N' Roses was like, oh, I feel this has really gotten to me, and this I'm so sad. Slash's mom dated David Bowie when Slash was a little kid.
Wow.
When Slash was still just Saul, when he was just a normal, when he was a little kid in Los Angeles, and his mom was
he still had long curly hair though.
Oh, he still had that. Yeah, he looked exactly.
He was born with that.
Yeah. He had that hair his whole life. But when he was a kid, David Bowie was like his mom's boyfriend. Like, pretty much like getting up, having breakfast before I go to school with David Bowie.
Slash just got even cooler.
Yeah, right.
Not to mention, he's in Guns N' Roses. His potential stepdad was David Bowie, and he knows everything there is to know about dinosaurs. Slash is the coolest man on earth.
And he hates Axl Rose.
No, they're buddies again.
No, they're getting back together. They're doing.
I know, but listen, he doesn't like Axl Rose.
Yeah.
Those two guys don't like each other.
No.
And And I'm fine with not liking Axl Rose.
I think that's one of those things.
Yeah.
It's like, when I heard Guns N' Roses getting back together, and it's like, oh, I thought these guys hated each other and they were calling each other assholes. I was thinking of Die Hard 3, when he's like, I thought you said you didn't even like your brother. And it goes, there's a difference between not getting along with one's brother and not caring.
When some dumb Irish flatfoot throws him off the roof of a building.
Yeah.
Right?
But and the thing is, there's money to be made there.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that was one of the things that happened with going to see Star Wars. They were running those Guns N' Roses reunion teasers.
Yeah.
And they just played this little, and I was
Really?
like, what's
I didn't
that?
see any of
I didn't see it the first time I went. One of it might have even been the third time that I went. I saw it, and I was like, this, and I'm like, this is I literally, for one point, I had to evaluate my life, because with watching the trailers and seeing there's going to be a Superman Batman movie, there's going to be a new Star Trek movie, there's going to be this awesome Captain America movie, there's going to be a badass looking Jungle Book movie, there's all this cool stuff coming out. Guns N' Roses is getting back together, and I'm about to watch a new. Oh, there you go. And
the Deadpool movie, don't forget.
The Deadpool, I forget. There's
just a few weeks away.
all this stuff I never thought I'd see, and Guns N' Roses is getting back together. I thought it was one of those things. I'm like, I got put in the Matrix.
Yeah.
I'm like, I am. Like, remember they said they put everybody in the Matrix, and they were like too happy. I'm like, I'm gonna wake up in a tub of jail. Yeah, I'm like, this is too right. I'm like, or did I die? I mean, this is my heaven. I'm like, this.
Huh?
Oh, it's just curse. Are we allowed to curse?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Fucking all right.
Fucking fuck.
Oh man.
Oh god damn it! What the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah, my buddy saw the Guns N' Roses, like the Buckethead.
Yes.
Axl Rose Buckethead Guns N' Roses. About, I think it must have been probably 3 or 4 years ago. They came through DC, and he sees a lot of concerts. He was a huge. We saw Guns
Actually,
N' Roses.
3 or 4 years ago wouldn't have even been Buckethead. Buckethead was more like 10 years ago. Guns N' Roses. 3 or 4 years ago was Bumblefoot. Guns N' Roses.
I was going to say it was Bumblefoot. Yeah.
Yeah, Buckethead left, and they got another guy.
Well,
with
either
a
Because,
weird
Guns
name.
N' Roses has to have at least one guy with a weird nickname in it.
Yeah, and a strange guitar deal. Well, anyway, all his main report had to do with how fat Axl was.
Oh yeah.
He is a caricature of, like, he used to be like one of those big energy guys, like all over the stage, kind of like just a house of fire. And he said he can't do it anymore.
Oh yeah.
He never, he had a voice that was like in that very high register, but beyond even that, he can't move. So I'll be really interested to see what kind of like personal training they do to get him into some kind of shape to be able to
Get him some Nutrisystem.
I'm interested to see that, and then we're going to see, the Axl Rose Weight Watchers Nutrisystem.
Hi, I'm Axl Rose.
Hi, I'm Axl Rose. But
This used to be me.
I'm interested to see how long this tour actually lasts before
how many riots break out.
Yeah, how many riots break out? Are they allowed back in Montreal? Or
Yeah, it has more disaster potential than a Van Halen reunion tour.
Right.
'Cause they're always like 2 seconds
that's still an
away.
open wound.
I forgot. You got fucked out of a Van Halen concert.
I've been waiting, Jay. I've been waiting 35 years, I'm going to say, probably even longer, to see Van Halen live. My wife got me tickets to see Van Halen for my birthday. The day of the show, David Lee Roth gets the sniffles and cancels the fucking show.
Oh man. So
But the night before, I saw Rick Springfield, and he blew me the fuck away.
Hey,
so fuck David Lee Roth.
Jesse's Girl, man, that song holds up.
Absolutely.
So
I'm like, fucking Van Halen is just.
Yeah, the Guns N' Roses thing. I saw Guns N' Roses. My whole life, I was, from the beginning, I was a Guns N' Roses fan, right on board.
Yeah.
At the beginning with Appetite for Destruction,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had an opportunity to go see them at Giant Stadium at Meadowlands in New Jersey when they were touring with Metallica.
Saw that show.
And yeah, it was one of those shows, and it wound up being one of the disaster shows where they only played for like 20 minutes, and then Axl stormed off stage, and
he played a very abbreviated set that night. Which was kind of the presaging to what happened in Montreal.
Right.
Me and my buddies were all much more interested in Metallica than we were necessarily in Guns N' Roses at that point. I think maybe Primus was in that bill too. I want to say. I might be off. I'm not sure, but
hey, you know who was in Primus? Buckethead.
Really?
That's where Buckethead was in Primus before he was in Guns N' Roses. Yeah.
Wow.
Nice call.
It all comes together.
Because I saw Buckethead with Primus once, and then I saw Buckethead with Guns N' Roses. But I did actually get to see Guns N' Roses.
This is the guy that wore a KFC bucket on his head?
KFC bucket.
He's Slash Light.
Yes. Yeah, he wears it like a top hat, and then he
wears
has
it like a top hat, and you can't see his face.
Like almost like a kabuki mask. Yeah.
Was he original or extra crispy?
I think he's smoked enough that he's probably extra crispy.
He has recorded something crazy like 100 albums.
Yeah, he's talented, right?
He's talented, but he's one of those guys that's like
avant-garde.
He's avant-garde, and I think he's more of a studio guy than like his own guy. Like he might be too technical, like almost like Dream Theater, where like if you are really into the technical aspects of music, the things that this guy's going to do are awesome, but you're not getting there's no heart to it, I guess.
Yeah.
Is one of those, that's something that you can pick up with bands sometimes.
He's playing a 9 time by 5 signature time, but it doesn't really sound very good. He's keeping perfect time. It sounds like crap.
You're like,
wants to listen to it.
Yeah, it's a guitar clinic, but I don't want a guitar clinic. I want to put a little soul in it. I was over the summer. I went with my wife to go see. She's a big fan of the Goo Goo Dolls.
Okay.
And I have to say they did a hell of a show. I'm not going to crap on them. I thoroughly enjoyed them. But one of the opening acts was Daughtry.
Oh, okay.
And Chris.
I look like that guy.
Yeah. But he's another example of that. I'm like, the guy sings really well, but it just feels like
karaoke.
He's not into it. Yeah, like karaoke, or just like I'm doing I'm here and I'm doing my thing, but there's no emotion behind it. And he's trying to do all that rock star stuff, but it just doesn't.
It doesn't come together.
Not selling it the right way. I'm not buying it. He's trying to.
He was on American Idol, so
he's the best. He's the best karaoke singer of a Pearl Jam song that you could ever want.
Yeah,
right.
Pretty much. Yeah.
He can knock that stuff out of the park, but he has no real, he has nothing really behind it.
Yeah, he's like a tribute band to 90s alt rock type of stuff.
Yep.
Pearl Jam, Live, Creed,
right.
Any of that.
All those guys, he kills them. He's great
like,
at the local bar.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And it's like, it's not bad, but it's not. It just felt disingenuine.
Yeah,
and
it's not bad, but it ain't good.
Yeah, and even and going back to the Guns N' Roses thing, when I saw Guns N' Roses, it was like 2000, 2001. I saw them at Madison Square Garden, and they played like a whole big long set, 2.5 hours, hell of a show. There was a dude who flew all the way from Japan to see Guns N' Roses in Madison Square. He spoke like 5 words of English.
Oh my! And
he was excited out of his mind. And I had a buddy who and Chris has met this guy, tall, thin guy, long hair, looks exactly like Axl Rose, 1989.
Okay.
And we call him Axl.
Yeah, we call him Axl all the time.
All right.
This Japanese guy turns around and sees him, and he goes, Axl Rose, #1, Guns N' Roses, and he runs off, and he comes back. He bought him a beer, a Madison Square Garden beer, which is like $32.
$32 worth of.
And he's like, Axl Rose! And I'm like,
my introduction to Axl is one of my favorite stories ever to tell. we were going to Ozfest, and I walk into Mike's house, and I see this dude sitting on the couch, and he's got like these skinny ass jeans on, his white leather jacket, and a bandana on his head. I'm like, hey, cool, an '80s rocker dude. And then he stands up, and I'm like, oh my god, it's fucking Axl Rose. It's fucking Axl Rose. And he spent the entire show like running around the parking lot and signing autographs, and people getting pictures taken with him. You know, and this is like pictures people actually had to pay to have developed because camera phones weren't a thing then.
Yeah. I mean, this guy, we would take him to concerts, and girls would, like, take him off to vans and into the woods and blow him and stuff. And I'm like, hey, man, good for you.
Well done.
But, again, back to the Guns N' Roses MSG show with Buckethead and all the guys. They did a good 2.5-hour set. Awesome. Loved it. Played all the old stuff. Played, like, 2 new songs, like, 10 years before Chinese Democracy came out.
Right.
And we're like, okay, the new songs aren't terrible, but, you know, he was playing all the old stuff. We're like, great, this is it. We're psyched. Axl Rose is at least back. It's not the Guns N' Roses that we knew and love, but I'm like, here we go. The next day they had a show in Philly that friends of mine went to.
Yeah.
He decided not to go on because he wanted to watch the Lakers playoff game. So, riot in Philadelphia because chairs getting thrown, people going to the hospital, people getting arrested.
You would think
you had it,
right?
And he like gave the speech. He was like, he almost like apologized to the fans at Madison Square Garden. He's like, you know, I know you guys stuck with me after all the trouble, and I'm glad that you're here. You know, it was like that speech you get from an alcoholic of like, it's going to be different now.
This time I really got it together.
Yeah, and then 24 hours later, he's like, no, I'm going to watch basketball. Fuck 70,000 people in the fucking Philadelphia.
Oh, man.
I can understand it was hockey, but basketball?
Yeah, he's from Los Angeles, or he lives in Los Angeles. They don't, you know. Lakers, that's the thing. When you're out there in L.A., it's Lakers. Lakers.
I guess.
I'm going to admit I like basketball, but...
I used to be a big
we can move past that quickly, especially given the state of the Sixers right now. We can just
the who?
Skip right over that. But, I was gonna come back to your Van Halen story. So 25 years ago, I got a chance to go to see at JFK. There was the Monsters of Rock tour.
Okay.
5 bands: Kingdom Come, the Scorpions, Dokken, Metallica, the whole reason we won, and Van Hagar.
Okay.
It was like, this must have been, maybe it was like 1988. When did
That's
Sammy
right.
Hagar
that was right around the beginning of Van Halen.
Yeah. So we're stoked to see Metallica. I'm stoked to see Dokken and Kingdom Come, because at that point they sounded like they were going to be the next coming of Led Zeppelin.
I remember Kingdom Come and being up there, you know.
Yeah.
And then, I can hear Dream Warriors today and still love that song.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. And Metallica, right? We were psyched to see this, right? So we go to this, and me and my friends, we're all like, you know, we're in high school, right? We're young. There's a guy next to us and we're like up in like bleacher seats in JFK, right? And there's a guy who comes in next to us who's like, he's gone at the beginning of a 10-hour day concert. He's gone. He's like totally like staggering around, right? So he's got a bag with him, and in his bag he has 2 big bottles that are NyQuil, that say NyQuil on them. But apparently what they are, I guess, is food-colored vodka. Right? So me and my buddies, we're there to see...
Man, rock on.
Yeah, right? Exactly. A 10-hour concert, you need your supplies, right? So we're there to see mainly Metallica, and Van Hagar is going to go on at the end. They're like the closing act. And my buddies and I were kind of like lukewarm to that. Like, we loved Van Halen when it was David Lee Roth, but weren't that big of fans of what Sammy Hagar was doing, right? So we're like, all right, so if we get to the end and everybody's like tired or wants to go home or whatever, want to get a jump on traffic, we'll ditch out on Van Halen and it'll be fine. Well, this guy, after like hitting kind of like his peak early at like the middle of the Scorpions, like kind of cratered on his energy and was like sort of hunkered down like on the side, right? Well, apparently he was there for Van Hagar. So we're like still undecided about what we're going to do as Michael Anthony decides to rip into a bass solo.
Nice.
Now, I don't know about you, but bass solos aren't really exactly what, you attend a concert to hear. This guy is like, he's air guitaring along with this bass, and then he decides to do a rock star jump from one of the bleachers down to another bleacher that's probably about 4 rows down. He's been drinking vodka all day. This goes
Dude felt nothing.
cataclysmically wrong. I mean, this guy literally, like, he lands on his shoulder and his head and everything else, and like the people who are sitting there, who he kind of lands on / next to, are like, "Oh my God, are you all right?" Blah 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 blah. We're like, "Yeah, we were headed out." We're like, "We don't want to be a part of this scene." We're like, "We're gonna go right now. It's time to head out." So I left. I saw 2 or 3 Van Halen songs sung by Sammy Hagar poorly, heard a Michael Anthony bass solo, and have never seen Van Halen since. So I'm right there in the boat with you. But yeah, that was a fun show up to that point.
I will have in defense of the Hagar Van Halen. I saw them in 1995. It was they had put out an album called Balance.
I was gonna say it had to be the Balance Tour.
It was the Balance Tour, and this
is that the one? Which one? What is that? The song with the Right Now? Is that on there?
No, this was after Right Now. This was the album after Right Now.
Okay.
This might have been the album with the song from Twister, Human Being.
Okay.
Oh, it was the big song in like Twister.
All right.
I could be right, but I couldn't tell you what the main thing about. But the reason I remember specifically that it was the Balance Tour was it was at the Garden State Arts Center on the Parkway in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, my grandparents had the season ticket, the subscription package to the Art Center. So we used to get ticket because they would want to go see like some like Frank Sinatra, maybe not Frank Sinatra, but old timey acts or something like something they wanted to go see, or if Pavarotti was going to be there, something they're like, we're going to go to this. But we would all go. Like my mom would get tickets to go see Chicago, and my aunt would go get tickets to see Celine Dion or something like that. And I would get all like the metal shows and stuff like that.
Nice.
So I'd get these seats, and because it was subscription, I'm getting that first crack at it. I'm sitting first, second, third row, paying $25.
Nice.
And we're like Van Halen. We're like, fuck it, let's go see Van Halen. So we sat second row center for Van Halen. And at the end, we had the Michael Anthony bass solo.
Yeah.
The Eddie Van Halen guitar solo, the Alex Van Halen drum solo, and the intimate acoustic Sammy Hagar doing one of his solo songs type of things from back in the day.
I Can't Drive 55.
No, it's a little more. I can't even remember the name of the song. I didn't know it then, and I don't know it now. But when the show was ending.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Van Halen, or Eddie Van Halen, I'm sorry, took all his guitar picks and threw them into the audience, but did not throw them so they like spread out and flailed all across the front row. He just kind of took a fistful of guitar picks
and threw them
right at me. So everybody for 4 rows was now on my head. I'm pulling guitar picks out of my shirt. I'm pulling guitar picks out of my shoes. I had guitar picks all over, and then I just I had dozens. People were pulling them off me, and I still had handfuls of them. I'm giving them to girls as I'm walking out. I'm like, "Hey, you want a guitar?" I'm like, "Here." I kept 2, and I put it in a little frame and framed it, and it says Van Halen Balance Tour. It's the Eddie Van Halen signature guitar picks, and I gotta say, Sammy Hagar, Van Halen won me over there. At least Sammy Hagar, his voice, his stage presence, and at that point you had a stronger repertoire. 1988 they had one Sammy Hagar album.
Yeah,
at this point you had a couple of the hits, you had a couple of things had kind of settled in, and it really won me over because I was always one of those like, I'm a David Lee Roth guy when it comes to Van Halen, and then I saw this and I'm like, I like them both.
Okay.
I always thought they should have went utility with Van Halen and had both guys there.
Right.
And then you could just like tag in, tag out. Like
if it's a more fun song, then
But,
Sammy sings it. If it's a more serious song, Dave sings it.
Yeah.
Or you could have gone Freebird rule, and you could have brought in Gary Sharon.
And Gary Sharon could have came in and
I knew someone was gonna bring that up.
I got him.
hey,
Can we break into a ballad of more than words?
I saw Extreme a couple of years ago. We got tickets, I think, for free.
I'm sorry.
Bettencourt can play the guitar, man. That guy can play.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
We saw those dudes. It was like Rat was doing the 25th anniversary of Out of the Cellar.
Yes.
And Extreme was the opening act, and this is like a club show. And Extreme goes on, and that was the first time that I realized that Gary Sharon was gay. Because he came out and was like, and I'm like, oh, and my wife's like, is Gary Sharon gay? And I'm like, I guess.
I didn't know, but yes, apparently.
And I'm like,
can't fake what he's doing.
Like, made Paul Stanley look like Johnny Cash.
Wow. Wow.
That was. But again, I'm like,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
This dude owned the place for a couple minutes. I'm like, oh, all right, I'm like, he didn't work out in Van Halen, but Extreme in the 3 or 4 Extreme songs that I know, and I'm like, this guy fucking killed it.
More Than Words and Wholehearted. Those are the only 2 I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think those are the only 2 I know as well.
There was one more that before More Than Words, they had a hit with or a quasi hit with Get the Funk Out. If you don't like what you see here, get the funk out.
Can't say that I know it.
Know that.
Can't say that I know that one.
It was definitely more rock. It was more like glammy 80s rock, 80s metal type of stuff. Yeah, extra, and even like that Van Halen album, that Van Halen 3 album, is a fantastic Extreme album. It's a shitty Van Halen album.
It's a horribly shitty Van Halen album.
But I'm like, if you listen to like I have some Extreme on my in my iTunes stuff, and I'm like, and I have that Van Halen 3.
You've grouped them together now.
He's
changed the band name.
Yeah, just change this. Like, Extreme featuring guys from Van Halen.
This is Van Halen. Oh man.
That's what I thought. It's funny, like, Van Halen now is touring, and then Sammy Hagar will tour with Michael Anthony, either as Chickenfoot or just as like they just go out together. And I'm like, that's like going to see half of Van Halen, I guess. It's
yeah. To me, Van Halen was cool when they were David Lee Roth, and then they were fun when they were Sammy Hagar. And the problem is like there were a million fun bands.
Yeah.
Who were like in that little mix of that LA, that sort of LA scene. But there weren't a lot of bands who you just looked at and went, no, those guys are cool. You know what I mean? Like those guys are like, they're the cool guys. And that was the problem for me with Van Hagar. There were some great songs there. I really, some of those songs are really good because you got an amazing guitarist at the very least writing some of the music. But to me, I never really kind of felt like they were cool. They were just like I want the best of, like those guys, right? Like, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it always fell apart for me with him there. So.
I could see that, and that's like I mean, and you're being a big Metallica guy, you can like see the dynamic shift in Metallica of that early Metallica where you had Cliff Burton and you still had the Dave Mustaine influence, and you're like, oh, this is so good. And then there's like, with Metallica, it's that Black Album that I always tell. I'm like, it's the Black Album.
To this day, I blame Bob Rock. I blame Bob Rock fully
that
for
was
that.
what I was going to say. Here's the thing. Biggest loss of Metallica, not Cliff Burton. Flemming Rasmussen.
Yes.
Now, I don't know who Flemming Rasmussen is. I don't know if that's a pseudonym for somebody or what. Producer of those first 3 albums. That sound that you love so much with the guitar down-tuned with the drums and then the bass kind of over here doing its own thing and a very dense, warm, rich sound to the thing, that was like those first 3 albums, that's the blueprint for it. Then all of a sudden they do that Injustice for All, where they self-produce that and everything's recorded in a tin can.
Yeah.
You can hear everything that Lars is hitting that's on the high end. And then, you know, from there it just goes, you know, Load, I said this to my buddy Sean when this came out. Load is the best grunge album that a grunge group never made.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
and I like Load. There's a lot of good.
It's just not a Metallica.
I like a lot of stuff on Load. Yeah, but it's not really a Metallica album. But Bob Rock is one of those few people that like I would if I was walking down the street and I saw Bob Rock, I would walk up to him and punch him square in the face. Because he took...
You ruined what I loved!
Exactly. You ruined what I loved. You ruined this music that, like, just was, you know...
You have spoiled the sanctity of my home!
You turned it into this...
Guys walking down the street, everybody's hitting them in the face.
Oh, absolutely. If you see Bob Rock out... If anybody that's listening, if you see Bob Rock, I could fully condone punching him right in the face.
I think it's a law. You can't be prosecuted for that.
No, I don't think so. Because Bob Rock gave us Saint Anger, which might be the, as Mike has said to me, might be the best James Hetfield album ever. But it's not a Metallica record, and I don't hate Saint Anger. I don't. But
really, I do.
I don't hate Saint Anger.
I went back. I think we had me and Chris had this conversation a few years ago. I don't think I had Saint Anger, and he gave me a copy of it. And I had listened to it. I had friends that had it. I listened to the whole thing, and I didn't. You know, when I heard the first song, I'm like, okay, let me see where this goes. And then I heard the whole album, and I didn't like it. And then I re-listened to it again, just as like I think it just came up like randomly in a CD changer, and I'm like, and I sat there and I listened to it, and I'm like, you know, and I said, I'm like, if this was the James Hetfield solo album,
right,
I think I would have enjoyed it. The same thing with Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy. If that had just been called Axl Rose, I'm like, this would have been a strong showing. But
I bought Chinese Democracy for $1.99 at like Dollar Tree.
I'm gonna go on record here saying I like Chinese Democracy way more than I like Saint Anger.
All right.
Chris's mouth just fell on the floor. Chris doesn't even know where to go with that comment.
I would agree with you.
I'm gonna have to give Chinese Democracy another chance.
There's a song in there called Better. You know that song Better?
Yes.
That's a really good song. It's got a strong riff, and it kind of sounds a little bit like early Guns N' Roses. I mean, there was on Saint Anger, and I'll admit that I did not necessarily like put it in, you know, heavy rotation after making this initial decision, but there's just, that to me was the aesthetic of And Justice for All taken to its really bad logical conclusion.
Yeah.
Like real hot, like the top end, like again, like that whole thing of like everything really like treble cranked and like there's no bottom end of the sound because they had the new guy, right? That
Right.
was with
Jay,
the new guy,
Jason-
Robert Trujillo.
Well,
Right.
Bob Rock actually played bass on the album.
Yeah, and they didn't want that anywhere near it, right? Because he probably can't play. At least not to the level that they're probably used to.
That album was recorded with Bob Rock on bass.
Yeah, Saint Anger was
And that I don't hate it. I don't,
Okay.
but I don't love it either.
I'm gonna give it another listen on your recommendation alone.
Oh, I'm not recommending.
You
I'm just saying,
you hear that right
I
here?
don't
Chris
hate it.
highly recommends Saint Anger. It's
That's
his all-time
that's on
favorite.
The show. That's on the show notes. That's what we lead with.
Yes.
Chris recommends you listen to Saint Anger over and over and over again.
Put it
No,
on.
not-
With going back to And Justice for All, with me, that album was my first Metallica album.
Wow.
Because I was in I want to say I was in 7th grade.
We were in 7th grade because that was my first. That was my first Metallica album.
What is that?
remember
What year is that?
87.
87.
87.
I remember being handed a cassette tape of that and saying, "Here, listen to this. You'll like this."
Yeah.
And I've been a Metallica fan ever since.
I had
Gotcha.
friends that were Metallica fans, and they had and partly of growing up in Central Jersey, everybody knew somebody who walked around with every Metallica tape on them. You know, it's like
I can
'cause there was literally Old Bridge Metal Militia people around, the guys who let Metallica live in their house.
Yeah, well, they're recording it.
Yeah,
I can even tell you the name of the guy in 7th grade that handed me
yeah.
a copy of Injustice for All. His name was Dan Smith. And
Well,
he said, you got to listen to this.
I had got, so I had heard some of the other Metallica stuff, but the first physical album that I was able to listen to front to back was And Justice for All. And then I went, and then I'm like, all right, and then I'm like, I bought Ride the Lightning, and I stole somebody's Masters of Puppets from him. I didn't steal it. He left it. I'm like, I don't know what happened to it, man. And I filled everything up, and I would go. I would look for vinyls and stuff because you could get them cheaper. I would do all that stuff.
So I'm going to date myself a little bit compared to you guys
No,
because
not that much. Not that much.
I had a similar story, but for me, the 7th grade handoff for me was Master of Puppets.
I was gonna say it had because you're 2 years older than we are, so I was
Yeah.
I was gonna say it had to be Puppets, which
Right. So
is my favorite Metallica album.
mine too.
As much as Injustice has that special meaning for me of this was my first Metallica record, Master of Puppets is my favorite Metallica record ever.
Yeah. And I remember because it was the classic. You remember you used to do the high speed dubbing, right? You would try and press record and play at the same time on your little two tape player.
Yep.
This buddy of mine, I remember his name too, Andrew Kleinman, gives me, and he was this button down, straight up looking dude who loved all of this super heavy stuff. So we're both metal guys. Iron Maiden was my band, the jean jacket with the Live After Death Eddie
Nice.
on it, was on my back, for 70% of my high school years, I'm gonna say. So he hands me a dubbed copy of Master of Puppets and says, "All right, you got to check this out." And I go home and put it on, and you hear the opening, dun dun dun. I'm like, all right, I can get into this. And then it drops into Hetfield going crazy on the rhythm guitar of Battery, and I was like, oh, I can't. And then he starts singing. I'm like, what is this? I don't like this. And I turned it off. And then a day later, I'm like, but that opening portion was so cool. I got to go back and just listen to that first 30 seconds. And then it was literally over 3 or 4 days where I would just listen to a little bit longer of a snippet where my body and my brain kind of got oriented.
You kind of have to acclimate yourself to those first couple albums. You kind of have to acclimate yourself to the sound, and it's
this is so dense and aggressive. After you're used to listening to even stuff like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and all those guys.
'Cause-
Like this was just such the next level.
Up until I was handed that copy of Injustice for All, I was like all that '80s new wave pop shit and punk shit. It was like,
geez.
oh yeah, man, it was like Flock of Seagulls and fucking Tears for Fears, and which I still love, but hey, you know, but
It's good stuff, but that was a sea change. Yeah, so finally I listened to it, and then you get through that, and you hit master, and you're like, oh my god, this band's got it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Never look back.
I love
So-
that we brought the comic book artist on and we
And,
talked.
we talked
Yeah,
to
fucking
I was
metal.
gonna say, now
Metal.
you got your book signing coming up, right? You got new book, new.
Yeah, well, it's not a new book. It's a new location of a local store. I know this probably
Okay.
won't go up in time for anybody to hear it who could hear about the store in terms of the signing, but for anybody who's in our area, it's a shop that used to be in, as I was telling Chris earlier, it used to be in the Burlington Center Mall. They kind of had the mall was going through some changes, going through some redevelopment, so they lost their lease and moved to a new location about, for those who are familiar with, kind of the Jersey area where I am, central Burlington area, they moved about 2 miles down the road in towards Burlington city of New Jersey. And so the store is called Heroes Comics and Sports. And great store. They've got an amazing back issue, like literally just has to be 110 long boxes of comics
Nice.
that are unfiled. Like he's got a whole filed section of long of probably 30 or 40 that are bag boarded in order alphabetical. And then he's got his whole section of dollar books, and then he's got literally this pile that with the new space that he has, he just unloaded his storage unit, and now there's 110 unsorted boxes. And if you want to go in there and look through, he'll price it for you. He does some great deals. So again,
that just kind of I miss doing something like that, like going through a big box of unsorted and just be like, cool. And even sometimes you just get something and you're like, oh, I remember this. Like I remember seeing this cover and not getting it back then, and I haven't thought about this book since.
He really works with you on pricing. Like especially if you go in there once, twice, 3 times, he starts to get to know you, and he'll look. So anyway, we're doing a signing for on the Square Comics. That's my main, the company that I own and that I self-publish my books through. We'll be signing copies of Centralia 1 and 2. We'll also be signing copies of Opposing Forces, which both of those were books that when we were on before, or when I was on before with you guys, were available and out. Now, interestingly, in the time since we last spoke, I've also done some freelance work on a new title for another company called Outpouring Comics.
Cool.
They're doing a book called Heroes United, and if you guys want, I can definitely give you some preview pages if you wanted to throw them up on. I got some. They're unlettered or anything, but they're just the artwork from it. But I can definitely send you some preview pages to throw up on the site. Great group of guys there. They're out of Wall, New Jersey, and they have a bunch of different titles. They have a little bit of a relationship with the folks at the Secret Stash.
Okay.
Kevin Smith's store over in Red Bank. So you can pick up their previous titles that they've released there, which are like Voda is one of their titles. Inheritance is a title. But the name of the company is Outpouring Comics. The book I'm doing with them, and I just actually put the 22nd page of Pencils to bed earlier this morning. So we just finished the first issue. Should be, hopefully, I'm thinking that we might be on shelves with that book maybe by end of February. But definitely go to their website and check them out. They're a great group of guys, doing some really interesting things. They're a lot of their work is very what's the word I want to use here? I want to be diplomatic because I'm so good at that. But it's very like all inclusive, meaning you're not going to see your standard four blonde white guys on a team and a red haired chick. You're gonna see
diversity.
See what's that?
Diversity.
Yeah, you're gonna see diversity, right? You're gonna
Isn't
see.
that an old wooden sailing ship? No.
Yes.
You're gonna see some. You're gonna see some people from all different walks of life, and I think that's something that I really respect. John Miller, who's the CEO of Outpouring, I mean, he's a very staunch believer in trying to depict, all kind of walks of life in terms of a superhero comic, and so I think that's one of the things that you're going to see in some of the books that they're going to bring to market. So
Nice.
I'm really happy to be working with those guys. They did, again, Heroes United, so it should be out hopefully, like I said, maybe end of February, beginning of March, but yeah, that's kind of what I've been spending a lot of time doing as far as that. So.
Now, I don't remember if we talked about this the last time you were on, but as a comic book guy and as an artist, that formula of your comic character that everybody's jacked and everybody's ripped. There's been a lot of criticism of the portrayal of females in comics.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with it happens the same thing with male characters. That I remember one of the ones that I first noticed that it seemed out of place to me was Cyclops in the X-Men. That Cyclops, whose nickname was Slim.
Slim. And
then in 1989, or mid-90s, when they the new X-Men.
The new X-Men came out, he was absolutely jacked.
Super jacked, 8-pack and lats and
yeah. I am.
I am of two minds of it, though, because even as a fat guy, I find reading a book with aesthetically pleasing people in it.
Right.
Enjoy. You're like, oh, all right. And it's not just. I guess you don't really want to see a superhero with a beer gut, but to put some of the realism to it. Cyclops, who's a guy who just has a force blast that comes to him naturally, could get away with being in kind of quasi shape and not have to be. They do fight hand to hand and they do train for all those situations.
Yep.
But with some heroes, I always felt it's like, why is Superman
jacked
if his power comes from his body being a cellular solar battery?
I go back to what you said is and I think a lot of comic artists, especially as you kind of move into the late 80s and early 90s, a lot of people who were becoming artists in the industry learned to draw from other comic artists, and so if your main training was sort of okay, well, John Byrne drew it this way, and I love John Byrne. His style in the days when he was doing X-Men and when he was doing Fantastic Four, that was my jam. That informed a lot of what I loved about comic art. But if you learned your anatomy from John Byrne, John Byrne's heroes and females, they all maybe Colossus had a little bit more mass on him than Cyclops did, and maybe Wolverine was a little shorter, but they all spent a lot of time in the gym, clearly. So I think that especially as the industry really blew up in the 90s, I think a lot of people came in who just had that as their aesthetic of I'm going to produce beautiful people. Now, I'm never the one to sit here and pretend that I don't probably fall a lot into that trap myself, but there is something to be said for in an escapist kind of fantasy world that, like you said, do you really want to see a lot of people walking around who aren't, in kind of sort of body beautiful sort of shape.
Yeah,
but when you throw a couple of
I
people
I don't necessarily want to see me on the comic page, you know.
Yeah, right. It's aspirational.
You know?
Yeah, it's aspirational in a sense, right? You want to be able to say, hey, get there, be that guy, right? That's the hero. I will agree with Mike though, like throwing that slim guy. Like if Cyclops was back to the way that, say, Paul Smith, who drew the X-Men in like the 160 area, like 160. He did probably about a 10-issue run, Paul Smith, and he drew Cyclops as much more of a leaner guy. That adds to the contrast and can be really dynamic in the way things are. The other thing that I really, the trap that so many comic artists fall into is the clothing. It's too easy to design every superhero that you ever have and just put, it's just a naked body with just, I'm going to draw this little line here to symbolize the glove, and here's the break for the belt, and here's the break for boots, as opposed to, you get somebody like Jim Lee draws beautiful people, but you know what else Jim Lee does great? Jim Lee draws very dynamic, realistic clothing. His Batman, right, who's still ultimately is in that bodysuit, but that very first image you saw when he took over on Batman, what did you see on the bottom of that foot? You saw a full-on boot sole.
Yes.
Every little detail.
Treads on a boot.
Had thickness and dimension.
The belt looked like a real belt. It wasn't just kind of yellow squares on his side. Right. It had, you could kind of see the depth and the texture of what he was, what he was drawing. And even in the early Jim Lee stuff, or at least for me, the early Jim Lee on X-Men and doing some of the covers and things they did with X-Men, I remember him drawing like Sentinels or like Master Mold or something like that, and it looked like a real robot, I guess, in a way. Yeah. Unless like, here's your cartoon version of a robot or a comic book version of a robot. Jim Lee definitely put a lot of depth. I think gave or depth, texture, whatever you want to call it. Just gave it a.
There's a little more grit in a Jim Lee Sentinel than there is in a John Byrne Sentinel. John Byrne Sentinel is just a gigantic guy with a funky little head on top of him. Jim Lee Sentinel looks like a robot.
The John Byrne Sentinel looks like that robot, that scary robot from the opening of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
The one with the purple and the white eyes and
Yeah. So, as far as the more recent controversies with, the way women are depicted in comic books, and I fully, support any effort to draw diversity into the comic books. But I think that a lot of the people who are so staunchly critical also need to understand ultimately that comics are a business. And at the end of the day, if you want to put Mrs. Marvel and have her, represent a degree of diversity in both body type, shape, and then also, sort of her ethnicity and her background, that's great. But these ultimately are commercial ventures, and so what sells has to rule the day, right? If you want to go, there's tons of diversity all over the place in every indie publisher out there. You can go and find every shape, size, dimension, all that kind of stuff, and if that's your cup of coffee, suck it up. But if you want it to work in a commercial venture, then you got to put your money where your mouth is, and you got to really support those books. And I think to some degree now that's happening, and we're seeing some of those changes. But then in other cases, I think those efforts to do some of those things have not always met with success. So I don't know where the answer falls there.
Yeah, there's, and I think even if you go back, like taking it back to Marvel and Luke Cage and trying to create a black character in the early 70s.
Sweet Christmas.
And how it was, and you look and you're like, this is kind of, is this insulting? Or, and it was they were doing a blaxploitation movie character in a comic book.
They were doing Shaft.
They were doing Shaft, yeah. They were doing Shaft. Superfly, he had the big wide collar. He had with the deep cut, and the headband and the whole thing, and the Sweet Christmas, and and kind of talking jive and doing those things. But then, you fast forward 40 years now, and we're gonna have a Luke Cage miniseries this year on Netflix. Yeah. Luke Cage has just been in this Jessica Jones thing where he does say Sweet
Christmas, and I lost my mind when he said it.
That was so great, right?
Yeah. And when you see okay, and then the writing of that character in the past 10, 15 years, you're like, all right, this is not a movie parody anymore. This has become a real person who is a minority character in a book, and it started from humble beginnings, I guess is the best way to put it.
I'm gonna go back a little bit earlier though, even than his more recent appearances with Bendis' Avengers that sort of spawned, and obviously Alias that kind of spawned the current incarnation of him, and go back to one of your other things about that that idea of in comparison, because the first 49 issues of Luke Cage Power Man were, like you said, pretty much just your straightforward kind of, we're following the Shaft line of thinking, and then all of a sudden they hit issue 50, and they did one of the best things, and I think I'm 2 issues short or something like this, a complete run of the book that became, which was Power Man Iron Fist, and they did one of the great buddy movies of all time in taking this mystical warrior rich boy fish out of water and dropping him in with this, kind of for that time, street jive talking tough guy. Yeah. And those books are great.
Literally,
that is one heck of a comic.
The first comic book I ever got was a Power Man and Iron Fist.
Power Man, Iron Fist.
There was a lady that lived. They must have owned a convenience store. They must have for Christmas, or not for Christmas, for Halloween. She gave out comic books.
Comic books, awesome.
So when I was a kid, I got a Power Man and Iron Fist.
Should have come trick-or-treating in your neighborhood.
Yeah, right. My brother and my neighbor used to wear 4 different costumes to go over there and get other comics, because she did it for years. Like, she was still giving out comics in the late 80s, early 90s, when comics were
like $3.
And some of these comics that she was giving, they were old. They
old.
Were old,
my God.
The not old, not like, it wasn't like she was giving away Amazing Fantasy 15. She had stuff from the early 80s and late 70s and things that she must have just had this pile of things. But it was like, I got the same, and I'm like, this is an $8,
comic book, right?
Comic book. Just because it was $8, that was back when if a comic book was older than 2 years, it was worth money. When the comic book was really out of control.
Right. Yeah, and they weren't printing as much comics as they got to. But yeah, I love that book, and I think that that contrast between those two characters really made for an interesting Luke Cage, a more interesting Luke Cage, by playing him against the straight man that Danny Rand. And then what Bendis did with him? What's that?
I've read articles for years. I can remember reading articles in Wizard or in other comic publications where they talked about Power Man Iron Fist being the lethal weapon of the comic book world.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally. It's before anybody else was doing that kind of thing. Well, maybe not before anyone else, but at the very least concurrently with the kind of modern buddy action movie, they were doing that riff. The only thing that hurt that book was they just kind of constantly had a rotating creative team. It was always like, you had Dennis Cowan doing the art for a while, and then, kind of it really hit its peak, I think, when Mark Bright was doing it for a while. He really brought a lot to that book, I think, when he was doing it. But it was always like a shuffle going on between the creative team. But some great comics that ones everybody like, and then ultimately, obviously, his the Luke Cage that Mike Coulter played so well in that Jessica Jones TV show, though, that guy was Bendis. I mean, Bendis really, like, that's where the Luke Cage that first appeared there.
Yeah, he added where he was always, at least for a long time, from the late 80s through the 90s, he was like that background character guy. And they would use him in different things. He was in the Fantastic Four for a little bit. One of the times when the Thing lost his powers or went away or did something. He was always he was definitely a second string, third string type of guy. And then when I was reading stuff and I'm like, he's in the Avengers now. It was like that. Here's a character I always liked. Yeah. Who people didn't really know, and now he's in the Avengers. And I was really happy to see him in a TV show. And I was watching, my wife was watching the Jessica Jones TV show with me, and she doesn't know a ton about comics. Pretty much everything she knows from comics is from the movies.
Right.
And I will bait her with things, like there's things in the world of comics that she just doesn't know. Like, we would talk about somebody, like, dying in a movie and then coming back. And she's like, well, how did they bring this one back? And I'm like, there's a rule in comics. I'm like, nobody stays dead except for Uncle Ben and Bucky.
And even that doesn't work.
I did that for a year, knowing that Winter Soldier was coming out.
Okay.
I would bring up that all the time. Nobody stays dead in comics. And so it familiarized her, because to her, Bucky was just Captain America's buddy.
Yeah. And
in the movie, it wasn't a big a deal to her.
For all intents and purposes, for our lives, up until recently, Bucky was dead.
Yeah,
right. Bucky was always dead, and those were the two that always stayed dead: Uncle Ben and Bucky.
So in Winter Soldier, when he takes off the mask and he's like, "Bucky," and she's like, "I thought you said Bucky's always dead." And I'm like, so with when we're watching Jessica Jones and they introduced the Luke Cage, I didn't say, "Ooh, there's Luke Cage." I'm like, let me see how this, because I didn't know how they were going to introduce it or how much they were going to get into. So
he got into it.
Yeah, well, they got into it.
Wow!
And I'm like, yeah. That's just,
that was like one of the things, like I started watching the Jessica Jones show. Before our buddy Will, the guy we used to do the old podcast with, and I know that he will sit and watch with his kids who they're 14, so I mean they're kind of getting to that age where they're at least learning that stuff about that stuff in school. But I like text message him after that first episode. I'm like, do not watch this with the kids.
Don't watch this.
Don't watch this with the kids. And he's like, why? I had the perfect response to that. I just said, "Sweet Christmas."
Yeah. And what I was laughing about that, I'm like, I started thinking about it. The Spider-Man cartoon that's on Disney XD now. There's the Ultimate Spider-Man.
Okay.
One of his teammates, sidekick guys, is Luke Cage, Power Man. So I'm like,
the ultimate version.
There's an ultimate version. It's a amalgam kind of traditional Marvel, Ultimate Marvel. That he has Iron Fist, Luke Cage, White Tiger with him. He has I'm like, I'm watching a guy from a Sunday morning cartoon have up against the wall sex with another superhero. But
Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Man of Steel, Woman of Tissue, not anymore.
When they did the reveal that he had powers, she's like, "Is he somebody?" Her reaction was like, "Who's this guy? What's he?" No. And I'm like, "Oh, that's Luke Cage." And they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, and she's like, "Why does he have powers? What is he?" And her, she's like, "Is he a mutant?" And I'm like, "They can't have mutants." She's like, "Well, is he inhuman? Is she?" She's into it enough that she's kind of knowing some of the things. And I'm like, I'm like, it was an experiment, and they explain it. They're like, "Oh, it's an experiment." And she's like, "Well," and I'm like, "They're gonna get it. He's gonna have his own show. It's, we'll learn more."
You're punking your own wife while she's sitting there watching superhero shows with you.
Well, it's not punking as much as it's putting it like setting it up so to enjoy to kind of give her that background so she can enjoy some of the inside jokes for the people that have been doing this stuff for 30 years.
Which, in Mike's defense, it's incredibly fun to punk his wife. I've been punking his wife for probably close to 15 years now. So prior to them even knowing each other.
You get some some.
And I've become very good at like just kind of like Mike, with just baiting or just dropping little traps.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure Uncle Ben will be fine.
Part of the things with entertainment stuff is I love seeing people enjoy something that I enjoy. So if I can increase that, like, season it a little bit to give people moments. Like a friend of mine who I don't get to see as much as I used to. He was always a huge superhero fan, big DC fan. He was collecting the DC Superpowers figures well after the line. He's probably around about 10 years younger than me, give or take. Maybe not quite 10. I was 8 years younger than me, I think he is. But he was collecting these figures late 90s or late 80s, early 90s. 5-6 years after the DC figures were, the Superpowers figures were discontinued. He was going out and collecting them, and he had all this stuff. And I think part of it had gotten into him was he has a brother that's my age that had some of that stuff. So he had, it was around, and then he just continued to get it. And then even when he got into high school, he was just buying ones to collect them, to have them. And now his kid is into it. So we were at the Jets game a couple weeks ago, and I said, have you seen the new Batman Superman trailer? And he's like, no, I haven't seen it yet. I heard they're making that movie, though. I'm like, yeah, it's coming out of the show. I'm like, oh. So I go on my phone, and I pull up the latest Batman Superman trailer. And I'm like, here, check this out. And he's watching it, and he's like, oh, neat. Oh, no. Oh, cool. Lex Luthor. Oh, all right. And the part where the Doomsday character shows up,
right?
He's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And my phone froze for a second. And I'm like, oh, shit, hold on. Let me, refresh this. And he's like, oh, no, that's all right, man. I saw it. It seems pretty cool. I'm like, give it 2 more seconds.
Just let it go for a second.
And he goes, and when they do the Wonder Woman reveal, he had no idea. And the reaction on his face, he was 9 years old again. He was like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And to see things like that, I've always enjoyed people enjoying things.
Right.
The Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez movie, Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah. They're vampires.
I was a huge fan of it. I went, from the get-go. I was one of the few people that went to the theater to go see that movie. I was all about it. When it came out on VHS, I ran out and bought it because I was like, this is one of those movies that's going to fade into obscurity. I didn't realize how much of a cult following it wound up getting, that it became a phenomenon that it was. But years after it had been out, a friend of mine was like, oh, how's Dusk Till Dawn? And I'm like, oh, you never seen it? And he goes, no, I never seen it. I'm like, do you know anything about it? And he's like looking at the box. He's looking at the cover of the box. And he's like, no, I don't know. And I'm like, you don't know anything about it? I took the box out of his hand. I'm like, don't look at the back. I'm like, we're going to watch this movie right now.
We're going to turn the lights off.
And he was expecting Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, some of the Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez stuff, Desperado, some of the things that he had seen already. So he sat down, and we're watching it, and he's like, oh, here's this shooter, here's bank robbers, they kidnapped this family, oh, they're in this crazy-ass biker bar. There's fucking vampires in this movie! Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's a good time.
When Salma Hayek turned into a vampire, he all but shit his pants. He was...
That happened to me and my brother with The Ring.
Oh.
Remember when The Ring came out?
Yes.
Yes.
And the video on The Ring? And I had seen it, right? And so my brother's over my house, and I'm like, oh yeah, we I think this was still like in DVD rental times, right? I guess. And my wife and I think either we'd started watching it, and then she was just like, oh, I can't, this is too much for me. And I was like, all right, well, I stayed on, watched the whole thing. It scared me to death. And I'm like, all right, well, I gotta watch this again. So my brother comes over to my house, and I'm like, yeah, we got this movie, The Ring. It's like this horror movie. It's supposed to be pretty good. Do you wanna watch it? And like it's like 10 o'clock at night, right? And so we watched the movie, and when that video comes on, and he sees it for the first time, he's like, like he gets like looking around the whole room, like this whole thing. That movie ends. He didn't want to go home. He didn't want to walk out. He didn't want to walk out of my house at midnight and get in his car.
Well,
he was so freaked out from that movie.
That kind of feeds into the story that Will, our friend Will, has told, where he watched that movie. It was like late at night like that where he'd watch that movie. As I said earlier, he's got he's got twin daughters, and at the time one of them had really long hair.
Oh,
and then he just got done watching the movie, and
she comes out of the bedroom.
She came downstairs to get like a drink or something. Scared the fucking tar out of him. I wish I could have seen it, because I know I've known him for like 20 years, and I know like he is so easily frightened. I just wish I could have seen it.
That movie is.
We went and saw that stupid Blair Witch movie together, and he's like was awake for like 39 hours or something like that after.
We went to go see The Ring in the theater, and I went with a couple of people, and I remember two of the people I went with was two friends of mine that were dating each other at the time, and at this point I still lived at my parents' house, and we went and saw the movie, and we went back to my parents' house. My parents were away; they were on vacation someplace. And we're going to watch some other movies. We're going to have a beer or something like that. But they were so freaked out by the movie, they're like, can we stay here?
We don't want to go home.
We don't want to go home. Can we stay here? And not only did they stay here, they're like, can we sleep in the same room as you? I slept on the couch in my parents' living room, and they slept on the floor next to me, like little kids, because they were horrified. But then we're sitting there, and they're all freaked out, and they're like, oh, the thing with the horses. Because like, we walked out, and the first thing that we saw when we walked out, there was like some poster at the mall for something with a horse. And they're like, all these things. They were there, we're at the house, and they're all like, and we're having some beers, and we're like, oh, it's all right, just chill out. It's just a movie. It's just not like movie. It's fucking 12 o'clock midnight.
Phone rings.
The phone rings. My mother. They were in like San Francisco or something, and she's thinking it's like 11:30. So the phone rang. Lost it. Don't answer the phone.
Don't answer.
I'm like, it's my mother.
Oh man, The Ring. Yeah.
I got so into that Ring. I own all 3 Japanese rings.
Oh, like Ringu?
Ringu. I own Ringu 1, Ringu 2. I own Spiral, and there might be one other one.
You own Spiral?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I want. So I'm not for all that I watched The Ring and enjoyed it and watched monster movies. I love monster movies.
Right.
I love horror movies like I'm not a Saw guy. I'm not like, these kind of like movies. The Ring was sort of like one of those one-offs, and I enjoyed it, but I walk into my comic book store one day, the local store that I my normal store that I go in every week, and he always has a movie going. I walk in the store one day, and the Japanese version of Spiral is on, and I was disturbed.
Yes, Spiral.
That movie freaked me out.
Spiral is the Ring 2 alternate universe.
Yeah.
It's because there's Ring or Ringu, the original Japanese one. Then there was a sequel. Then it was like the writer made one sequel and the director made another sequel, and that's where Spiral came from. That it was a alternate sequel to the Ring. I have Ring Zero, which is a prequel to the Ring. That is awful.
Awful.
It's Sadako. It's not the little girl's name is Sadako in the Japanese ones, and it's so the story is so fucking weird. Like even explaining it to people, it sounds stupid. At some point before the videotape thing, her spirit leaves the well and becomes two entities. That the girl that Sadako always wanted to be becomes a teenager and goes to college and has friends and leads a normal life. And then evil Sadako, killer little girl, is there and starts killing all of nice Sadako's friends. And I'm like, oh, this is hot garbage.
Hot garbage.
And you know how, it's one thing to sit through, like, a bad horror movie. And it's one thing to, but to sit through a bad horror movie with subtitles, I'm like, I invested a lot of time into this.
You've reached a new low.
Yes. I'm
not scared, and I have to read these words.
But you know what? It was one of those things that it just got so ridiculous that I'm reading it, and I'm like, it was like getting the equivalent of now. It was like getting text messages from somebody who's like drunk. Like, what the fuck is this? Like, I'm rewinding the
really said.
I'm rewinding the DVD, and I'm like, did they just say what the? I don't even remember what it was. I just remember being so like, oh, this is fucking. This doesn't even make sense. Like, this is, and it was filmed that it looked like one of those Asian soap operas. It had that type of film quality to it. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you guys watch Family Guy at all, but a week or two ago on Family Guy, they did a bit about Korean soap operas.
Okay.
And I've seen some of them on, like, because I'll always stop on some of the foreign language channels if something catches my eye.
You kind of have to.
Yeah. Especially the Mexican one. I mean,
the Mexican one is
you gotta stop there.
Yeah, with especially that one with just the fat guy in the tuxedo and the girls dancing in the bikinis and then. There was one Mexican talk show that was literally like a hot chick in a bikini interviewing people in a hot tub. Nice. But I watched.
It's fine. It's a different culture.
I would put it on at my one buddy's house one time just because it would piss him off. Because we would go there to watch, it was on like Sunday nights. Like we'd go there to watch football, and after the 4 o'clock game was over and before the 8 o'clock game started, I would put on Vietnamese or Korean or whatever they were. These Asian soap operas, and he's like, "What the hell's going on?" And it's so over the top, expressive, dramatic. And I'm like, and he's like, "What? You don't even know what they're saying." I'm like, "Yeah, but I get the gist of the story." I'm like, "It's like watching Mexican wrestling. You know what's going on, even though you don't really understand."
Oh, fantastic!
And it's super exposed. The film quality is like so, like you're so there. Like it's like everything's like super separated.
Yeah,
it's like
and that's and the Ring Zero just kind of felt like a student film / soap opera of and it played out like fan fiction, like bad fan fiction.
Yeah, well, there's no guarantee that you can make a great sequel to a great movie. The Matrix is proof of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The Matrix is proof that you can make 2 bad sequels.
The Matrix is proof that you can make 2 bad sequels, and the sequels are so bad they make you enjoy the original one less.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get to the point where I could watch the original Matrix again. Matrix 3, I hated it so much that I couldn't get back into Matrix 1 for years.
I think I own Matrix 3. I don't think it's out of the packaging, but that's just the completist in me, where it's like, okay, I've got, I've got everything. There's only one movie in all of my movie, my movie purchasing that I just refuse to buy, and it goes against my completist need, and that is Batman and Robin. I will not buy it.
I think you had the same conversation the last time Jay was on.
We probably did.
And how you refuse to buy Batman and Robin.
I just refuse to buy Batman and Robin. Like, if somebody gave it to me as a gift, I would probably stab them in the neck with it.
And it's not sharp, so it's like
I would make it sharp.
It's the little hurts more.
Like, you hate me this much? You gave me George Clooney and bat nipples? Do you hate me this much?
Is that the one with Alicia Silverstone?
Yes.
Yes. And the bat credit card, and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman, who's just...
Yeah.
I went on a date.
My head hurt.
To go see that movie. I started dating this girl that I had met when I was in college. And I remember sitting there watching the movie and hating it. From, like, the beginning, like, hating it.
You broke up with the girl afterwards just because the movie was so bad.
Well, she liked it. And I was like...
This isn't gonna work out, honey.
Cultural things. She was South African, so I'm like, it must be a cultural bridge. I'm like, they're a bit of a backwards country, with the apartheid and all that stuff. So I'm like, maybe they're behind the times a little bit.
Oh God!
Holy shit!
Yeah, I can't do it.
I mean, there. I'm trying to think. There's other superhero movies or other comic book movies from that point, from that 90s point, that are just, a lot of them were just kind of suck.
Yeah, but nothing reaches that level of suck.
Have you seen...
Not even the Roger Corman Fantastic Four.
Have you seen Steel?
Ooh, I couldn't.
All right. I'll give you Steel.
I might not have ever made it through a whole viewing of Steel. I think I kept shutting Steel off.
That movie is so bad I have blocked it from my memory. I worked for Blockbuster Video when Steel came out on DVD, on video, and we had an entire wall of Steel, and that nobody rented it ever.
Yeah, it wasn't a good time for superhero movies. We live in a golden age. That's
I always say, I'm like, the beginning of the golden age of superhero movies, that first bright spot was Blade.
Yep.
That Blade was the first good Marvel movie ever, and it was the first good superhero movie probably since the second Batman movie. And I'm never a huge fan, I enjoy that second Batman movie as a movie, but as a comic book, as a fan of other things Batman, and I like Tim Burton, but what Tim Burton did to the Penguin
is almost unforgivable.
Yeah.
It's almost unforgivable.
It wasn't good. I mean, I was good when you said first good superhero movie since. I thought you were just going to go first Batman.
I was gonna,
because to me that was sort of the metric.
Yeah.
I actually will go back even. I'm going to go even more granular if this is possible in this conversation. There's a moment in Blade where it's in the final fight when they storm, what's his name, Reverend Cross or whatever. The guy who's the big bad vampire, right? And Blade...
Frost?
Frost, my bad. And Blade kind of jumps down or lands in like a pit, and when he lands, the whole pit that he's in shakes, and the whole scene like just has a Hulk-like impact. And I remember watching Blade and coming out of the theater and turning to one of my good buddies, the guy who wrote actually Opposing Forces, and turning to him and saying, you know, they actually now can really do it. They actually can now make superhero movies the way they need to be made so that everybody can really get on board with how awesome this is. Because that, and then the scene went on to have a lot of like super heroic kind of fighting and stuff, and guns and knives and everything flying. But that one moment really like summed up like, here's superpowers in full effect on a screen in a way that really kind of like brings it home and makes it awesome. And I said, you know, not that I was some kind of great prophet. I was like, they can really start to do these well. And lo and behold, they just keep getting better. Their representation of what makes these superhero movies so amazing is the real world practical application of these powers. That's, to me, that was the beginning of it. I as you were starting that conversation, I was like, he's gonna say Blade. He's gonna say Blade. He said Blade.
And you know, if you take it back to 1979 and the first Superman movie, where the tagline was "You will believe a man can fly," and at that point, you know, Superman and Superman 2,
they hold up.
Were the pinnacle of the superhero movies to me for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, Superman, yep. Superman 2, and Batman were like, here is what a superhero movie should be. And for a long time, it was like, and that was like, oh, this is the best. You know, it might never get better than this. And then they tried, and there were things that were, you know, there was the Punisher, that Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie. It holds a special place in my heart. I think just purely the soliloquy that he gives at the beginning. The "Come on, God, answer me" thing, which my brother can still do to this day off the top of his head.
Yes, he can.
My brother knows the whole thing. My brother was a huge Punisher fan, and my brother loves that movie. And we would watch it all the time. We got a copy of it someplace. I think we got like a weird bootleg copy of it before you could even get it regularly. And we got it, and we watched that movie all the time. And Lundgren is so, it's not even stiff, but it's this weird, like, smug, it's whatever he does, you're like, I can't stop watching this.
Yeah.
Because every time he talks, it's just so, it's good and bad at the same time.
His acting style has been frozen in amber from that moment.
Yes.
Like that's the only performance he now delivers.
Yeah. But it works. It's like, you know, like he plays the same exact character in Expendables. It's but it's like, all right, it works. Yeah, you know, it's
yeah. In Expendables, it's like, yeah, he's chewing his own scenery over there. Just let him go.
Yeah, Expendables. That's why they had to make it, because everybody's chewing scenery in the Expendables.
Yeah, right. Everybody gets their own little section. Well, speaking of Expendables, Sly Stallone with the Golden Globe last night. Did you see that?
I missed Golden Globe. For Creed?
Yeah, it's okay to miss the Golden Globes. No one actually watches it because most of the people who are participating in it are drunk.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one moment for fans of the stuff that we like was when they gave him, you know, so almost like a lifetime achievement award kind of a thing.
Nice.
But he won it for, I guess, supporting actor in Creed or whatever, and he went up and he had a really good speech, you know, a good acceptance speech. But the key thing, I guess, at the end of his acceptance speech was he said, you know, most of all, I want to thank my imaginary friend Rocky Balboa, who's done more for me than anyone else ever has, or something like that. And I thought that was kind of like a nice sort of footnote or whatever to the end of, maybe hopefully the end of his acting au revoir. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think he's entering an interesting point in his life now, where as a guy who, he there's the visual Sylvester Stallone acting performance thing, but Sylvester Stallone wrote a lot of that stuff that he was in.
Oh yeah, no,
and there's interesting thing, like I was thinking about this recently, and it was before a few years before John Rambo came out, that fourth Rambo movie that came out in the 2000s, like right before Rocky Balboa came out, or around the same time.
I don't know if I saw that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's seen it.
Well, people saw it, and people liked it. It was much. It definitely was. It harkened back to First Blood and Rambo. It wasn't. Rambo 3 with being as nuts as it was. But at one point, Stallone was working on. I heard this report that he was working on a script for a fourth Rambo movie to follow up the Rambo 3, because Rambo 3 he goes and helps the Afghanistan rebels fight the Russians to go fight the Soviet Union
with a bow and arrow.
With a bow and arrow, he's blowing up helicopters with a bow and arrow. But he was going to write a story that the Rambo character stayed in Afghanistan, because here was a guy who he was finally respected and accepted for what he was, like a warrior, having this finally the kind of the thing that made him a monster in the United States. There they appreciated it at a different level, and they celebrated it, and he was he finally got that acceptance that he had been looking for from going back to the original First Blood. And then what happens to the character is 9/11. And Afghanistan rebels attack America.
Oh.
And now he's the American government would come to him and be like, you can be our man on the inside. But he has to choose between
the people who
the country that made him a monster or the country that accepts him for who he is. And I'm like, that is very deep for a sequel to Rambo 3. When he's out running a mountain exploding or whatever he's doing at the end of that.
Now this is not made, right?
No, that never got made.
This is not what John Rambo was.
No, what he changed it up and took any of that type of political stuff out of it, and it's John Rambo is in the Asian Pacific, and he kind of like a riverboat guy for fishing some of those jungle rivers, and a group of kind of like United Nations, like they wanted to film atrocities that were happening in like Laos or one of these crappy Asian countries where they're like they have a scene where like the army shows up in a village and they're like throwing children into a bonfire, like they're just like real like shit people, and then they capture these nice Americans that just want to help people. So he's got to save them. He picks up his big knife and gun again and goes in and saves them. And I like when you're talking, like he gets a machine gun and he's blowing the heads off of bad guy soldiers. But they made these guys so bad that there's like no like even the biggest pacifists would be like, no, shoot all those guys in the fucking head. They're throwing babies in a fire. They're
fantastic.
They're like, yeah, turn them all into Jello. Whatever you're doing, that's.
Oh man. Jeez. Oh.
I think that's a good spot to end on, and turning bad guys into Jello.
We're all over the place. I think I will say we did have, I think, some nice talk about comics and about the, the art in comics.
We squeezed in a solid 10-15 minutes of
comic talk.
Enough meaningful, importance, and then we talked about how,
we got a wide
how
range
some
of
great
topics.
bands from the '80s kind of got shitty in the '90s.
Which I really liked. Like, it was like we bring the comic artists on, and we really didn't talk comics.
I talked about Ring Zero. I haven't even thought about Ring Zero in years, and I remembered way too much about it.
I'm just gonna drop one last name.
Okay.
For the next time that I get a chance to come on.
Which is anytime you want, man. Anytime you want.
I love the invitation. I'm just going to say Balaam and the Angel, and I'm going to ask everybody to do a little bit of research because if you know Balaam and the Angel, you know deep cut 80s pseudo metal.
Okay.
These guys.
I'm looking them up as soon as we get off the
I'll tell you what, that is some good pseudo 80s metal, and that's it's nowhere near the heights of Rambo 4 to reach, but this is the right group to appreciate Balaam and the Angel.
Fantastic.
So
awesome.
Nice.
I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I'm
intrigued. Yes,
I'm absolutely intrigued. We'll have to post a review on next week's show. Just like
it's good stuff.
Yeah, this is what Jay recommended. Yep. It's not quite on the level of Saint Anger, but.
Hey, what are you gonna? That's the takeaway. The show notes have to say Chris loves Saint Anger, best album ever.
I don't love Saint Anger. I don't, but I don't hate Saint Anger either.
Maybe
anyway,
this gives me my perfect. Never mind. I was gonna get into something, but it's too late. We're gonna start talking.
You get into something, and it's gonna be like 1:00 in the morning when we finish up this show.
I know. Never mind. Ignore me.
But you got the signing coming up on Wednesday, Jay. Anything else you want to?
Signing coming up on Wednesday, 12 to 7, and then we have there's some cons coming up that I know we're definitely going to be at. I know we're definitely going to be doing Camden Comic Con, which is it's a ways off. I think it's in April. I think there's a possibility that I may be doing Big Apple Comic-Con with the guys from Outpouring, and then there's some other local stuff, that'll happen, here and there. But anybody who wants to find out what's kind of going on with our stuff, they can certainly visit onthesquarecomics.com, which is the website. You can buy the books there. If you can't get out to one of our signings, you can see other artwork, some of the different commission things that I've done for folks.
And there's a link to that on our webpage as well.
Awesome. That's great. But other than that, it's always great hanging out with you guys. It was, it's definitely fun, and I look forward to the next chance to talk about stuff. So.
Come on and BS about more weird shit.
Yeah, that's what made this so good. Was we were just talking about weird shit.
Shit.
It wasn't necessarily us bitching about some movie or whatever. It was us talking.
There's not many conversations that can cover Gary Sharon and
Gary Sharon. The show notes. The show notes will be incredible.
Yes.
This is an education in and of itself.
Absolutely. But anyway, you can find us at the Channel Z Podcast at WordPress.com, Facebook.com/Channel Z Podcasts. If you want to email us and ask us to have Jay on again and have more random stuff for us to talk about, shoot us an email at channelzpodcasts@gmail.com.
Yes, send us a topic and we'll ramble on about it.
We'll ramble on about it for 2.5 fucking hours because that's what we'll do.
Yes.
Even if we don't know about the topic, we will make shit up.
Yeah. We're some wordy motherfuckers.
We are some wordy motherfuckers. So anyway, I'm Chris.
I'm Mike.
I'm Jay.
And we will catch you next week.